Boa tarde, pessoal. Espero que vocês tenham tido um ótimo almoço. Vamos voltar aqui com a nossa programação, com a palestra do professor Sebastian, da University of Graz, com a temática Physical Education, Inclusion and Diversity, a Central European Perspective. Thank you, Sebastian.
Bom dia. É um prazer de falar hoje com vocês. Portugal is limited, my Portuguese. Okay. I would need some help with the presentation. Can someone please help me to put it on? Or can I do it on my own? Maybe I can. No. Okay. Now I got it. I think that looks good. Perfect. So thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm really happy to talk to you here today. And I will talk about physical education, inclusion, and diversity out of a certain perspective I brought to you, a Central European perspective. It will? Okay. I will just talk and you can manage. A Central European perspective, and mainly focused on the German-speaking countries such as Austria, Luxembourg, or Germany, of course, northern parts of Italy, or parts of northern Italy, sorry for that, Switzerland. So that's Central Europe, and we have like a discourse bubble, I would say. It's a strong bubble. We are quite a few people, and let's say in a historical debate like the last 50 years, a lot of physical education, discussion on physical education as well in general, and inclusion issues and diversity issues are discussed in the German-speaking bubble in publications being German. So you might not know this discussion, and I thought it might be maybe fruitful to bring it here and to talk about this. It reflects several points we talked about this morning. It also brings some other aspects. And of course, this is my view on this discourse. Before it was better. Don't worry, I just talk and then it's not so important to see the slides. So, of course, this is my view on this perspective or on this discourse, and it's a certain view I have, being a white male, being able-bodied, everything. I'm the fourth white man talking to you today. Maybe we should reflect on this later too. But anyway, this is my perspective I bring to you, and I hope it's kind of fruitful, and I hope we can get into a discussion. I just wait for a moment. It looks good. Thank you. Obrigado. So this is what I want to do. After a short introduction, I will give you some contextualization to understand what I'm talking about, what this discourse is about. And then I will focus a little bit on research and physical education, inclusion and diversity, and on didactic thoughts regarding inclusion and diversity in physical education. And I will do this, I said, out of my perspective. So mainly, not only, but mainly focusing also on own work then in terms of this discussion. And the first thing I want to bring to you is this. This is a question a German pedagogist, this is not about physical education, it's just a pedagogist. You can see by this year, it's quite a long time ago, he put this into discussion. He said, how can you master all this with a bunch of children whose talents, abilities, skills, inclinations, and destinies are different, but who are nevertheless to be educated by you in one and the same hour or lesson? So that's a problem, and this problem, I think, is something we all are thinking about. And the solution he promoted was, okay, let's teach the average student. So take the average student and teach like we teach this one, and then maybe you are a little bit away of it, and you're a little bit away of it, but we will get you anyway because we focus on the average student. And I think this is something which you might also know, but at least in the German-speaking discussion, this has a strong tradition that we take the focus on the average student and we teach those people. And we try, or we think, or we have the idea that a one-size-fits-all educational approach is good. And of course, maybe you already see I have some trouble with this, yeah. And there's a lot of discussions on this. But we have in the German-speaking educational system a lot. There's an error in this, sorry for that. So we have a lot of teaching the average students and mostly to make homogeneous groups. So if it's too different, we make homogeneous groups. We have different schools, we have special educational schools, we make segregation on this. We have also other school systems. We had sexual divide or gender divide in schools until the 1960s, schools for women, schools for men. So a lot of these things we had, and this is all based on the idea that we teach the average students, and if it's too broad, then we have to divide the groups. So this is the tradition we come off, and out of this tradition, there's a long discussion right now, like for 30, 40 years, a lot of discussion problematizing this approach. And of course, we should problematize it. So this homogeneous approach since the 1960s is problematized. And one thing in physics education is that we talk since the 1970s in the, let's say, in this discourse I'm talking about multi-perspectivity. So we try to bring in the different perspectives which could be important for learners in physics education, because this has nothing to do with inclusion in the way we spoke about this morning. This is just the idea that maybe Justin loves running because he loves to enjoy nature when he's running. And maybe Malou also loves running, but she's competitive and she wants to be the first. So those are different perspectives which same people could have, and we should, in teaching, appreciate those perspectives. And that's the first approach which kind of breaks up or opens up avenues for different ways of teaching. And but this approach is there's a lot of discussion about this approach in the physics education theory, and it is in almost every curriculum. But if you see the practice of physics education, I know this from a lot of research projects and also from colleagues, teachers don't do it. So a lot of thoughts, a lot of ideas, but teachers don't do it. Then another problem we addressed, and we heard a lot of from Martin this morning, that we have ideas, ableist ideas, and maybe, or not maybe, of course, for sure, there are some people, some bodies, we once called it in a paper, are forgotten in the discourse. And that's in the German-speaking discourse, is completely like that. So people with disabilities did not take place in the discourse on physics education until the 1970s, not at all. And since then, just in a niche discourse. And then it just opened up kind of when a huge debate on inclusion and diversity came up with the Convention of the Rights for People with Disabilities. So that opened up avenues for a broader discourse on inclusion and on talking about diversity in terms of disability. But before that, our tradition is completely without thinking about differences in these ways. Okay, now I want to give you some contextualization a little bit more. So one main thing in our discourse is that we have a Bildung-oriented perspective. So the main aim, and this is not only in physics education, the main aim in education is called Bildung. Bildung is a word that means education, but it's a different approach to education, and it's a theoretical approach, first of all, but it has, of course, implications for practice. And the idea of Bildung is that it's self-determined enlightenment, and that it means that it's not me who could make it for you, that you on your own, everyone on his or her own, has to do this work. So it's about working on the relations between us and the world, which means material world, social world, everything. And this means that we have to work on our relations towards the world, everyone on his or her own. And this is something which opens up avenues for taking into account each and every person in the way he or she is, in the way they are. And this is really important, I think, in terms of inclusion, because this is an approach which could be very fruitful in my eyes for inclusive teaching, not starting from educational goals in a way we often do, also in the German tradition and practice. We also do that often. It's not that everything is Bildung-oriented, but to set goals from the outset and say, okay, you students, you have to learn this and that, and then I will see if you arrive there, certain standards, standard orientation. This is not Bildung. Bildung is completely the opposite of that. So the idea of Bildung is that you take your relation to the world and you take your problems that you have in a positive way, problems that you have in your relation to the world. A problem might be, I want to throw the ball in the basket and I'm not able to do it and I want to learn how to do it. Or it can be a lot of things, but it must be important for you and you have to be the driver of the personal change. And often we focus on that with the avenue of experiences. So a main focus could be, and often it is, to bring people in certain experiences which we call negative experience. Maybe this is a bit difficult to understand because negative in this sense is a positive thing. So a negative experiences could be that I walk and then I stumble. I walk, and when I walk, I don't think about my walk. I'm not interested in my walk. But when I stumble, something happens. And then my attention will be here. So this is a negative experience which might provoke that I will start thinking about myself and world relation, that I might start working about this relation. And so a certain approach in Bildung-oriented physical education is to bring young people into this stumbling, let's call it stumbling, with certain experiences of maybe sometimes failing, or experiences of not knowing, not understanding, strange, or even very good experiences. Could be everything which is not the normal, let's call it like that. Okay, and of course, in physical education, it is the physical, it is focused on the body. So the moving physically in the world is the main thing we're focusing on. So also the stumbling or the things we are working on have to do with body and physicality. Those are just papers you can, if you're interested in, you can find more about these ideas. More papers, sorry for not clicking before. And so let's have a look at inclusion. So the discourse on inclusion, I said, in the German-speaking area is a little bit disconnected from the international discourse, and I would say more than a little bit disconnected. I would say until 5-7 years ago, there were only really few scholars knowing and working internationally and knowing the work, international work on adapted physical education, adapted physical activity. This is something really not discussed in Germany. So there's a different discussion a little bit on inclusion. And out of this discussion, there's a lot of critique also on adapted physical activity and adapted physical education. And I think this is interesting in terms of what we had this morning, because some of the critique is exactly what we already had this morning. But in practice, in practical terms, the discussion on inclusion, when it became bigger, as said after the Convention of the Rights of People with Disabilities, it started mainly as a school structure debate. So it was mainly the debate of, I told you in the beginning, we had the focus on homogeneous groups, that we build homogeneous groups, we make special schools, and in Germany I think we have the most special schools or the most segregative system in the world, maybe. So there are a lot of different special schools, or special schools for blind kids, special schools for hearing impairments, special schools for learning impairments, special schools for language trouble, there's a lot of special schools we have. And it started, when inclusion debate started, it started as a school structural debate. So let's try to bring those students together. And it was a placing debate, as we had this morning also. But another thing that popped up then was the debate on categorization. So it was that, and this is a strong debate for the last, I would say, 7, 8 years. It was really strong in physical education theory as well as in educational theory in general, about the idea that we categorize people. This is a student with special educational needs, and then out of this categorization, certain things happen. He will or she will go to a special school, or will get some educational support, special support, or anything. And the problem is this might be stigmatizing. And out of this problem, that this might be stigmatizing, there's a strong effort on decategorization. And then on the other side, there's the idea that if we do that, maybe we lose the knowledge. So we have a lot of knowledge of how to teach people with visual impairments. This knowledge is in a special school for people with visual impairments. And if we decategorize, then there's no need for the school anymore. And then maybe we lose this knowledge, and this knowledge will not be available for the students. But the student might need this knowledge or might need a certain support. So, and this is a strong, and I think like dogmatically driven discourse in the German-speaking area, which is, in my eyes, really problematic, because it's either one way or the other way, in my eyes, is not fruitful. So completely without categories, if you ask me, it's not possible. And on the other say, yes, categorization is problematic and leads to problematic hierarchies, to stigmatization and everything. A third thing on inclusion is that we have a narrow and a broad understanding of inclusion. The narrow understanding of inclusion is it is about teaching kids with and without disabilities together. And the broad understanding is what I brought to you, and is also what I would bring now for the for the rest of my presentation, is much more than that. So inclusion is a social requirement that states the society must provoke services that are suitable for eliminating discrimination against people of all kinds. Important. It's not about disability or not, it's people of all kinds, at all levels, in order to enable the most equitable development possible for all people. So this is really a large thing if we can do that. And this is the idea in the theoretical discourse on inclusion. In educational discourse, this is the main idea, I would say. If we talk about practical discourse, it's more the narrow understanding. And if we stay with the broad understanding, there's a second term which is really important in the last years in our discourse, which is diversity. And diversity here is understood as differences that we have between people, and the differences might lie in different lifestyles, identity references, or also, of course, differences on physical level could be or are meant here. And but it focuses on differences that are considered socially relevant. And socially relevant in terms of which has influences or opportunities which you have in life or in participation in social systems, and then in educational theory, mainly in education. So it means that certain groups of people, because they are part of this group, have better or worse opportunities to participate in education. And just a second. There are certain, let's say, which are the most important, not all, but the most important diversity categories which are discussed here are gender, and then I brought a list from Rudolph. So gender, age, disability, nationality, religion or worldview, and sexual orientation. But the list is not ending here. It could be longer, and it should be longer, but those are, let's say, in physical education theory or also in sports science, those are the main discourses or the main lines of difference which provoke certain opportunities or less, more or less opportunities in social systems, and then also in sport and physical education. And a last thing about diversity, not the last, but for the slide, is that at the heart of diversity discourse lies the recognition of each one in the way they are to the world. So the respective backgrounds, concerns, and need are valued in a positive way. So this is important because a lot of discussion on heterogeneity, at least in the German-speaking discourse, is problematizing diversity, problematizing that people are not the same and that we cannot teach them the same way as the others. So we have a lot of discussion on these, how we can fix this problem. And I think a big problem about what you said this morning also is that inclusion is understood as fixing this problem. And I think the change or the shift should be valuing the people in the way they are to the world. And I think this building-oriented approach is something which could be really fruitful in exactly doing that. It is important to consider, I can make this a little bit quick because Martin made a good job in this respect. So diversity is not just about ableism, but ableism is a part of diversity discourse. And as you show with ableism, I think for all of these categories, diversity is something which is socially constructed. So gender issues, ableism is not something which is naturalistic or which is by natural there. So it's something we create in society because we say these differences are important for us, and we say that there are certain orders of differences, and within these order of differences, usually with a binary code, that means, for instance, disabled, non-disabled, and then value comes in, which means, for instance, the people without disability is better in sport, is more, can move better, can perform better. So at least this is what I perceive when I talk with students about inclusion. The first thing is, which is coming, inclusion is a good thing, but then we have to do less. It's clear to my students from the outset, but if someone with a disability is part of the program, we have to performance expectations, we have to lower because they can do less. That's clear. And this is what I try to say with orders of differences and then hierarchies which come out of this. And I think Martin showed this morning already very good. And so we have a lot of discourses in the last years on gender differences, interculturality, disability, and also about the entanglement of different dimensions in the discourse on inclusion. So this is really some discourse going on, some broad discourse going on in the German-speaking world. So the categories are established as distinctions, but they are not naturalistic. And they are a result of social attributions and structures also. This is something which I didn't say so far, but social structure is important here. So we have a certain social structure, and that influences also these orders of differences, or they influence vice versa. So orders of differences are reflecting social structure, and if we follow these orders as we reproduce this social structure. So while we say that people with disability can perform less, we reproduce this order of difference, and we reproduce a certain social structure in which people with disability are less worth than others. So this is, in a nutshell, what is meant with that. And as I mentioned before, we have dichotomous distinctions, we have hierarchical structures, and then we have those structures embedded in power structures in our society. And then a last thing, which is really important, is that these orders of differences are also intersectionally interdependent. So that means we have intersectionality. It's not just that there's an order of difference in terms of gender, and in another world there's an order of difference in terms of disability. They meet, and they meet in completely different ways and different spots. So again, it's important what is important to a certain person in a certain situation in educational contexts. Let's have a look on research. I will make it a little bit shorter, I think. If we look on curricula, Martin already told a lot, so I can do that quicker. If we took on curricula, if we look at diversity, we find out, Martin made a paper, there's in the preamble of curricula. So in the beginning, there's some talk about diversity, and there's written, we appreciate diversity, everyone should be part of, and everyone should be appreciated in the programs. But then there's ableistic things going on, and no appreciation for people with disability at all, or also for other differences. So like sexual orientation or things like that they're not in there, not even mentioned. And then also some colleagues made research about Austrian curriculum, and they found out there's also some problematic ambiguity. So that means it's not completely not clear. It's sometimes mentioned, diversity is sometimes mentioned, but it's completely unclear what is meant with this term. And then it stays something we say because it's nice as inclusion. We say inclusion is good. We say diversity. Everyone says, yeah, that's cool. And it's completely unclear what is to be done. So on that level, that shows research, there's not much talk about diversity. Second area of research is the attitudes, or are the attitudes of teachers. So what attitudes do teachers have towards inclusive physical education, towards diversity? There's a lot of research, or there was a lot of research, because it was, let's say, a high peak in about 5 years ago, I would say, or a little bit more than 5 years ago. And then right now, there's not that much research on these teacher attitudes. But what is to be found out, generally teachers say they're really positive as curricula. They say, inclusion or diversity is good, it's important, but they feel poorly prepared to do it, and then they won't do it. That's the main takeoff of this research, I would say. And the second thing is then that we found out that not every teacher, but many teachers have a strong focus on athletic and high performance. And so they come, or at least, I don't know how it is here, but at least in my context, most of the physical education, teacher education students come from sports. So they made sports, they are good in sports, they are working in sports clubs. So they come from the field of sports. And this is really a strong, let's say, large story told, and they live this story, which is strongly linked to certain ideas of performance and body, as Martin said this morning or two. And that hinders to open up the minds to teach differently, because they don't even question those body and performance norms usually. And this is really important, I think, or would be really important to think about these norms that we have, these ideas about what performance means. So the first take for many students, physical education teacher education students is, okay, if we talk about inclusion, that means to take performance out. No performance, then inclusion works. So, and that's too simple. And I think it's really important for each and one of us to make experiences in terms of Bildung, to experience, to perform. It's an important experience, and we should think about how to make it possible to make this experience for everyone. And this is a completely different thing than saying, okay, because Justin is here, we take performance out. Sorry, Justin. And so that means in the attitudes of teachers, orders of difference are highly reproduced. If we look at students' perspectives, we made some studies with students with visual impairments, so also with Justin together, with Martin together. We made an interview study where we showed that those kids we interviewed here had really shared patterns of established requirements of normality. So they thought that a fit, performance-related body, a healthy body is something we should all have, which is important, and physical education is there to bring people to have this. And so those were the shared ideas. In these interviews, students told us that this is important, and that's the mean for, we asked, what do you think, why physical education is there? What is the reason for physical education in schools? And that was clear. But then also came in the interviews that they say, but for me, this is somehow problematic. It is there, it is important for society, but there was an inner distancing from these students because they said they need maybe something else. For instance, they reported from balance problems, as an example, as a non-requirement, which is really important to them. So in a usual physical education, balance is not the main thing. So they have certain problems about balance or about jumping down somewhere, which was really, really difficult to them. And they reported they would need some work on these things. But it was something like a requirement that the teacher took for granted. Everyone can jump down here, so don't worry. Huh? That's nothing. Everyone can do. So we don't even think about it. We don't even talk about it. And those students had the barrier exactly here. And then they couldn't even participate in physics education. Or at least they told us that for them it would be important to do these things. And that means, I think it shows pretty good how these normality requirements are there, are dominant, and the students are not stupid. They understand it, they perceive it, but at the same time they perceive that they have to do that, have a fit, performance-related, to be fit, to perform in a certain way, to have a healthy body and all that. And there's a tension for these students exactly at that point. And then the second thing that popped up was a sub-segregation that there, you already mentioned that this morning too, that the students with visual impairments said, okay, we're better than the blind ones. And then sub-segregation took part. And we wanted to learn more about that. And we made a second study, like a follow-up study. And there we realized that this sub-segregation or the segregation between the students was highly linked to ableistic orders, to performance-related orders. And so these orders of difference became really apparent in that study. And it was really, for me, it was really strong to see that they were unescapable for these students. So there was one student, she reported to us, first of all, in hierarchy were the students being socially at the good position, so people love these students, have been the cool students maybe, which are that, and also sporty. Then second, the sporty ones which are socially not that at a good position. Then third, the students which are socially at a good position but not sporty. And then fourth, the students which are socially not in a good position and not sporty. And fifth, that came me. And that was really hard. It felt like the student told us she's kind of subhuman, less than everything or everyone there, and not even part of the game. And so, the study showed that it was not possible for her. She made several things. She experienced really bad bullying in physics education, and she tried to escape. And she had talked to teachers. She talks to the principal, school principal. Even police came to school because of an incident that happened. And in the end, the result wasn't that she got help. The result was always, we cannot change it. So they took her off of physics education because it was too dangerous. And the result was no escape for her. So that was learning, I think, of this process for the student, was there's no escape from these orders of difference. They're there. And you cannot do anything. You just can maybe go out. We say, okay, you don't have to go to physics education. But again, if we talk about Bildung and we say it's important for everyone, that cannot be the solution. We tried to find out, is there something special about the sample? So we made a larger sample with students in Germany, Austria, and the USA. And just in short, we found out that these orders of difference are important to all of these students that we interviewed. So what was really different, the way they acted within or towards these orders, because some of them said, okay, maybe society is problematic, but in here in physics education, people help me, I feel kind of good. Or others said, okay, I'm completely concerned, society is problematic, physics education is problematic. Others said, okay, it's problematic, but I kind of feel okay, I find my way in dealing with it. So that was different, but in each and every interview, we found that these patterns were really there. So these orders of difference were really prominent for those students, and that they perceived, and they found different ways of dealing with it, but there was no escape and no change. So that was the way, at least what I would take. And so this was what inspired me, at least, to do a research project, a participatory research project, and to think of how can we escape out of this bubble or out of these orders. Can we somehow not escape, maybe? I think escape would be naive, but can we somehow change something in there? these power structures? Can we kind of challenge these power structures somehow? And that was our starting point. We said there are a lot of experiences of discrimination and disadvantages for students. There's a culture, physical education, school sports culture, which is really not sensitive to diversity, and there are problematic body and movement related norms, and they're all connected to each other. And maybe this circle needs that we somehow put some change in there. And maybe it's too less just to go on that and change something here, because from here and here there will come strong influences, and also the same thing for here. So we try to kind of go and change it in a more holistic way, let's say, kind of. And this was the idea, to provoke more awareness for diversity, to break body and movement related normative ideas, and to come to more open school sports and physical education culture. And we thought this could be only possible with dialogue. We also had this morning, that dialogue is really important in here. So this is why we tried to make participatory research. We made this in 13 schools, and we tried, or not we tried, we made it. We made discussions with students, with teachers. We had certain ideas of how teaching could change. Then the teachers changed things in their teaching, and we did discussions again, also with the students. And it was really interesting, intense process. It was also problematic in my eyes, because we were all entangled in orders of difference. And we could not escape out of this. And then people from university come, or teachers in school discuss with students, and all with good intentions. But anyway, there are hierarchies going on, and it's inescapable. So it's really, really difficult case. But it was important, I think, and interesting as well. And out of this process came something like guidelines for physical education, which is aware of diversity, but not guidelines in certain sense of you have to do this, that, and that, like a tick list, and then you're fine. What we realized is the only thing we can do is to provide some principles, like overarching principles, which could be maybe helpful in this area. And I will come back on this later. Just a little last thing. How much time do I have left? Okay. You're not bored? Okay. I will just, yeah. What in this project we did not do, but I wanted to mention that this is also important, is space. We talked about space a little bit, but I'm not talking about spacing. I'm talking about space in terms of, as you mentioned also before, if we come to a gym, it's kind of clear what the gym is for, and it's constructed out of ableistic ideas. It's constructed out of certain ideas, what is to be done there, and who is the person, or who are the persons doing things there. And out of a sociologist perspective, like sociology of space, there's Löw, and that's really interesting in my eyes. And she says there are two things going on, which are spacing and synthesizing. Sorry, difficult word for me. Synthesizing. Okay. So these two things are important, or happening here. And if we take us, we could make it quick. So first is we have certain practices, and these practices, the way objects, but also people are positioned in space. These are common, and this is spacing. So if we look at this, you all sit and look into this direction. I stand here and talk to you. So this is a perfect example of spacing, and the way the room is built is exactly for doing this. It's not for talking, everyone being equal here. So the room makes clear it's not equal. And the second thing is the synthesizing. This means that everything of this has to be synthesized by the people within the spaces to become that space. So you have to know what you have to do here, and you do. You come in, you sit, you're quiet. I stand here, I talk to you. So we do that game, and that's important. It's not just the room doing it. We do it. We fill it with life, let's say it like that. And I think this is exactly what is also happening in gyms and physical education. And this is really, there's almost no research on that. And I think it is really important. We should focus on that in future. This is just what I wanted to say, because I also realized that in our project that this is really important. The space dimension is really important also in this, what I said before, the participatory research project. We didn't look at that. And afterwards I thought, that's really important. We should also look there. Okay, I will come back to the findings of this process that we had with the participatory research. And I think one first thing is that I think we should think of a dual approach. So a teaching which is a diversity sensitive teaching, I would call it, is not just to be sensitive to the diversity of learners, to give same opportunities to all. I think it should also consider diversity sensitivity as something which is a learning goal. So to bring the students to be sensitive towards diversity. I think this is really, really important to break this circle somehow and to come and change somehow orders of difference. Because if we just say every time out of a perspective of a teacher, I try to be sensitive to diversity and I appreciate every one of you, but you being students now in my imaginary thing here, being students, you don't care for that, or maybe you feel appreciated, but that's it. That's not enough. I think I should also be aware that you realize that sensitivity towards diversity is important to you. And this should be also a main educational goal. And that's important. I think we often lose that out of sight. And in doing so, we had 6 principles, and I just will go short, and maybe in discussion we can go deeper in if you want. So the first thing is to strengthen the student's perspective in teaching. The second would be to focus on potential and not on what is not on problematic. I'm missing the word now. What's the opposite of potential? Yes, thanks, deficit. Okay, and the third one is building relationships. I think this is really important, to build good relationships between teachers and students, but as well between the students, and to focus on this. And the fourth, you already know, multi-perspectivity. And the fifth, reflection, to reflect with each other on what is going on. And the fourth is the term in direction to build on, is experience-based learning, to make experience the foundation of learning and educational processes. So I come to my conclusion. I think diversity and inclusion are important in physical education in the discourse in Central Europe. And I think, or I hope you understood that we have a strong tradition on homogeneous group and homogenization, and a traditional focus on athleticism as being sportive in physical education. And we saw problematic attitudes, problematic demands for normality, and problematic appropriation of space. And maybe we could say these hierarchies which come out of this, so these orders of differences, what I was talking about, are unavoidable. We cannot step out of this. And I think and somehow it's unavoidable, and somehow also within it, we can work on them. And that's, I think, the thing we should do. And the main learning out of my research in this area, and I think the main learning out of this discourse. So I thank you for your attention. I don't know. Can stay here.
Bom, pessoal, tempo para perguntas agora. Quem gostaria? Doralice. Tática de tática.
Então, meu nome é Doralice. My name is Doralice from Federal University of Paraná. And I wonder, could you speak a little bit about the research you do on students' perspectives, how you are conducting that?
I didn't get very ranked. The research on
the
students'
research on
perspectives?
students' perspectives on inclusion.
You want to know about methods?
How is like a qualitative research, interviews, or what are you doing?
Those were interview studies with students. Yeah, we did, and but we did also interviews and work groups and group discussions with students in the participatory research. So I kind of mixed some results now a little bit. So what I had on the slides were interview studies, but some findings also come out of the participatory research project where we had the group discussions and the processes of developing things together. But I'm not sure if you want to know more about methods or methodology now.
Yeah, but perhaps the moment is tomorrow. I don't know, but I'm very curious about this kind of research. Yeah.
Okay.
Mais perguntas? Quer fazer em português? Acho que pode ser, né?
Oi, tá. Oi, meu nome é André, tudo bem? Eu gostaria de fazer uma pergunta para o professor Ruim, que é a questão da perspectiva que a gente viu de manhã da inclusão, é uma perspectiva subjetiva, ou seja, intrasubjetiva. Na questão da diversidade, a perspectiva está onde? Está na pessoa ou está na instituição, na escola, no clube? Onde se encontra a diversidade nesse aspecto?
Thanks for this question. I think diversity is the entanglement between the subjective perspectives, but entangled in let's say, social structure, because social structure gives certain ideas of what is valuable and what is less valuable. And I don't want to say that it is good. I hope you understood that I don't appreciate that it is like that, but there are certain values like ableism or like gender ideas and stereotypes and all this. And I think in diversity discourse, it is about, at least in my perspective, the way people personally bring themselves into, how can I say, to position themselves in this respect. So it's interconnected between social structure and the individual.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Gabriela. Thank you for our presentation that make me think about a lot of things in our teaching. In the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned one question for us that was saying, treating the average students is a solution. Mm-hmm. So my question is, we are still doing this as a solution for inclusion, or we may be doing inclusion?
Oh, who is we? It's what my mind.
We.
That's really difficult because I don't know in detail what you are doing, for instance. But
no, I mean what you were doing, or we're studying inclusions.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the way we are really doing inclusion, or we kind of doing exactly what you were asking in the beginning of your presentation, mentioning this is the way we think we're doing a good job.
I brought this up because I believe, at least in the discourse I come from, that this idea is really strong. And it is still vivid, and it is still there, and we still somehow do it. And out of this idea, we try to be inclusive, but still we stick to this idea. This is what I would say also for me personally. Even if I criticize myself for that, I would say I still come out of this. So, and I don't know what you are doing, so it would be difficult for me to tell that, but I think I would say, yes, we still do.
Thank you.
Mais alguém?
Hi, my name is Talita. I need help for the question, please. Em suas pesquisas, você entrevistou alguns professores. E esses professores tiveram receio de serem entrevistados, porque eu vejo aqui no Brasil, em algumas entrevistas com professores, que alguns não querem ser entrevistados por receio, talvez, eu não sei.
Yeah, that's also an issue in my context, that many teachers don't want to be interviewed or have trouble also, for instance, for showing what they do in lessons. So it's really difficult to go to a school and observe a lesson, which would be really, really helpful, I think. And we did it sometimes. Also, we did some video research, but it's really difficult. And we always have to get into good relation with teachers, which kind of open the doors. And that means that those teachers who open the doors are usually the teachers really open-minded in terms of inclusion, in terms of diversity. And with the other teachers, it's really difficult to get into contact.
Bom, pessoal, agora a gente tem, então... Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. A gente tem agora uns 15 minutos de coffee break, tá bom? Vou pedir para a gente fazer bem rapidinho, para a gente conseguir terminar a tempo. Aí os professores têm outra programação depois do evento. Então, 15 minutos de coffee break, tá bom? We have coffee. nossa última palestra, professor Fabián Arroyo, da Hofstra University. Thank you, Fabián. Just a second, I have to give a, a memo. But, pessoal, só para dar um recado aqui, essa é a nossa última atividade hoje com o professor Fabián. E depois, às 6h30, 7h, a gente vai no Em Breve, que é um barzinho que tem aqui. Are you laughing? Why are you laughing? Umas pessoas me pediram para ir no Em Breve, então a gente vai no Em Breve. Para aqueles que quiserem conversar com os professores, enfim. Então, é uma ótima oportunidade, tá bom? Então, essa é a programação para depois. Então, vamos voltar aqui na palestra do professor Fabián. Colonialism, Physical Education and Disability, com o professor Fabián Arroyo, Hofstra University. Thank you, Fabián. Thank you so much.
The more I knew about Brazil is that you always beat us in soccer because I'm from Chile. So that's pretty much the only thing always knew about Brazil. So anytime, it's really great to be here today and being able to present to you something that it's a topic that typically we don't talk about very explicitly. And I hope that I can provide you with some ideas to think about physical education, disability, and where knowledge is constructed, and what knowledge means to you, and what's accepted, rejected, or how we advance knowledge moving forward. So if I can summarize in a different way to you, is that I hope that by the end of this presentation, all of the things that we have spoken today, you don't take them for granted, but help you think differently on how to move your own field and your own disciplines forward that are more culturally relevant to you as Brazilians, rather than taking what we do in other parts of the world as the only truth that it's applicable to all other contexts. So with that in mind, I want to be discussing today about the intersection between colonialism, physical education, and disability, and how these three actually, they enter into a dialogue and how they actually interact with each other. That's my hope at the end of this presentation. Also, and I think in a nice way, it also ties up back to what we've been discussing most of the day. So I'm going to either indirectly or directly be involved with some of these concepts that we've been engaged today, which is ableism, power, privilege. I'll be throwing some concepts in relation to inclusion and how we can think about inclusion also here. And lastly, I want to offer some questions and insights to you to think about how to move all of these forward. So first, let me give you a little bit of how I want to start this presentation and what it means for me, colonialism, physical education, and disability. You might be wondering what that means in this particular presentation. So the first thing that I want to say about colonialism, it's about systems that shape knowledge, power, and being. In other words, is what is it that we accept as knowledge that is going to be applicable to my context? I want you to think about where this knowledge is produced. I actually want you to think about what kind of bodies are we trying to educate within physical education, and what are we trying to do with those bodies when they don't conform to the norms that have been presented to us historically. The second thing is about physical education. I don't want to talk just about physical education from a motor perspective or from a motor development perspective. I actually want to approach this as a social space where norms of movement, productivity, and normalcy are reproduced over time. So what kind of norms are being displayed in physical education? What kind of ideas are being displayed? What kind of movement is accepted or not within that particular social space? And lastly, disability.
I don't want to approach disability just as the impairment, but more so as a relational concept that is socially constructed, but also informed by our culture. How your Brazilian culture informs how you actually understand disability. And more deeply, what is it like to be a disabled person within the Brazilian context? So the body, and these concepts have been introduced already by Sebastian and by Martin earlier today, but also for me in this presentation, I approach the body as a sociological territory of colonial inscription, meaning that the body, that as a sociological concept, has been used to create hierarchies. Some people are more value in certain spaces, and some people are less value in certain spaces. And it's all that based on the body, not just in the flesh, muscles, and bones, but also what it means to be a body and a subject in the world. And by that, some people are more value than others. So the body plays an important role in this case in what bodies are actually we valuing within physical education, or perhaps what bodies are devalued within physical education. So in Latin America, we do know that most of the countries in Latin America, they have reached independency one way or another. We all are independent countries. We are republics. We have our laws. We have a Senate. We have, all these political structures. However, we still have some colonial tracing in our countries. And this is not just about as a form of independency, but also in more sophisticated ways. Where are we capturing knowledge from? Who are we learning from? Who are actually we considering the most prominent figures in certain spaces? What people are dominating the country? As you will see throughout the presentation, I am going to throw at you more questions than answers, but I hope those questions help you think differently. Historically, knowledge production and ideas have been generated in the global north. The global north is a structure, a political space, not just a geographical space, but a political space where knowledge is predominantly produced. And I hope I can show you some examples of what that means throughout the presentation. And many times, for us that live in the global south, and being the global south another political space that's typically dominated by the global north in multiple spheres, but within Latin America is considered in the global south, many times we take concepts that are created elsewhere and we just take them for granted and we just use them without being questioned at all. So that's where the space, or that's where I situate this presentation about. Colonialism has largely influenced current social orders, including what disabled bodies are devalued or valued within physical education. So again, when we think about physical education, who is being more valued than others? So again, I can't speak about your context, but again, some of these examples here hopefully can make us think differently about this. So the first thing I want to talk about in relation to what knowledge is being accepted, rejected, or what knowledge is being used to advance or feel. But there is also a relation between presence and absence, meaning what is present out there that we are using and what is absent from knowledge that we still don't know and why it's not present. And the second thing that I want to talk to you about is unquestioned knowledge, meaning the knowledge that we have available to us. What is it that we are considering acceptable knowledge and why we consider that acceptable knowledge? So this is just an extract from a systematic review that I did a couple years ago in relation to phenomenological studies in physical education, where the main informants to the phenomenological inquiry were disabled students. So one of the things that I found, and I know it's a little bit difficult to look at it right now because it's quite small, but the far right corner, it says the country. So most of the literature when it comes to phenomenological inquiry, it's not necessarily situated in Latin America at all, at least within the English language. There is no presence at that time about any form of knowledge created from within Latin America that could potentially inform what is it like to be disabled in the physical education space, again, from a phenomenological perspective particularly. So that can be a little bit problematic, because if we start looking at this, we're interested in phenomenology, and we are interested in knowing what is it like to be disabled in PE, then we might just take for granted experiences that might not be fully applicable to the context of Brazil or Chile or Argentina or any other space within Latin America. This is not to say that the available literature is not valuable. This is to say that what is it applicable to the context that you are in, situated in as a teacher, as a scholar, as a person, or an advocate for disabled people? What is it that you will consider acceptable, and what is it actually transferable to what you have within your own space? More recently, I mean probably 2 weeks ago, this paper was actually examining how inclusion is conceptualized within the physical education literature. So, and again, when it comes to being informing how inclusion is being utilized in reviewing the literature and how they use inclusion, most of this literature, as you can see, come primarily from North American countries and European countries' perspective. Again, this is not to say that this knowledge is not valuable. It is to say that what is it actually applicable to our context? But it's also a call for attention in relation to what are we doing as scholars, teachers, and people within Latin America to construct knowledge that is applicable to us also. So 3 points that I want to discuss about presence and absence of knowledge. The first thing is the current knowledge available is valuable, and it should be considered as a starting point, but it should not be considered as a finished product. It is not just the ultimate knowledge that we should consider and easily transfer to our context. It should be just a point to start to think, ideas to think about. Just like the ideas that Justin presented earlier this morning about inclusion or ableism or Bildung and all those ideas, these are just starting points for us to think about differently and how that actually applies to the Brazilian context in this case. But then it also becomes another question: what will imply to generate knowledge from within your own context? What should you consider? What kind of strategies are you going to use? What kind of population you want to work with? Who do you have access to or not? What people are valuable into informing this kind of new knowledge that we want to construct from within? So we don't have recipes to tell you how you want to go about and construct knowledge. It's more so about thinking how we are going to generate a knowledge that is, again, applicable and is relevant to us. And obviously, the third point there is because it's related to what methods and methodologies are more appropriate for generate knowledge here in Brazil particularly. Although we've done much of the work in qualitative work implies interview studies, is it necessarily the best tool for this particular place? Maybe it is, maybe it is not. I don't have an answer for that. But thinking about ways that are creative and are unique to the people that live here in this reality, in this moment in time. So in this study particularly, I want to give you an example from Chile. And this is why we are taking a lot of things for granted. So I wanted to examine ableism from the perspective of the Chilean physical education discourse. And I was very interested in only examining ableism, the concept that Martin introduced earlier this morning. But as I started to examine the curriculum, K through 12 physical education curriculum in Chile, I started to find that they were using some tools that were going unquestioned. And they were used as appropriate tools, and they were used as ultimate tools to evaluate the best way disabled students. So there were two fitness tests that they were mentioned explicitly within the curriculum. And one of them was the Eurofit, and the other one was a North American association that no longer exists. So these two areas, or these two measurements, were being used in the Chilean context unquestioned. This is the reality that we need to follow, and this is what we need to do to best evaluate disabled people within this particular context. So I started to think that, yes, there is a lot of ableism within the Chilean physical education discourse, but there are also a lot of colonial tracing within this particular content, meaning that we are taking for granted tools that are being used in Europe or North America, and they come and question to us, and we just use them because there is a perception that certain knowledge has more value, or certain tools have more value than others that have been constructed from within. Another thing that we found here is that disabled students are constantly assessed against non-disabled Western-defined standards of ability, just for the sake of using these two tools here. And then, obviously, there is complete absence when it comes to the perspectives of disabled students in general, but also we come from a region in the world where we have multicultural perspectives that are not being considered whatsoever. Another idea that I want to offer here, and again, and I'm offering another example from Chile, but here is I examined the adapted physical education content that was used within physical education teacher education programs in Chile. So two main ideas that I want to expose to you. The first thing is that disability it's typically framed within a deficit perspective. So we are typically associating disability with impairment or body functionality, and we are only labeling the kids according to their body functionality. And of course, that's a deficit perspective by situating the kids within just that perspective alone. But another thing that was very important, and I want to highlight here, is that all the instructors in the courses that I review, they were all using only European resources, particularly Spanish resources. And it's only because probably a language component there, because we share one common language, which is Spanish. But all of these resources were completely outside of the Chilean context. And we are not utilizing knowledge that is constructed from within. So here last year, Justin and I wrote this paper about understanding disability, but more so within a particular context of Latin America or South America, actually in particular. So one of the things that we discuss is many times we understand disability from the perspective of, or we attempt to understand disability from the perspective of a medical model, social model, and social relational model. But many times these models go unquestioned and they are just being constructed elsewhere, and we have taken them for granted. And we use them to understand disability, but we neglect the cultural component of being disabled within a particular region. So many times this course around disability also is being constructed and being unquestioned and being taken for granted from this course constructed only from a global north perspective. And when we do that, PE can become a social space where mechanisms for social control and normalization are being used, but more so has to do with having expectations regarding disabled students that are completely misaligned from what the culture actually implies in that particular place. So the question is, if I've been talking about we are taking knowledge unquestioned and we just take it for granted, then what is it so unique about Latin America that we should be considering, and why is this important? So I want to show you at least 4 ideas and thoughts in the next 4 slides that hopefully make you think a little bit different. So the 4 ideas that I want to talk to you is there is an existence of cultural diversity within a region. Particularly Brazil is a multicultural country that you are represented by many groups, and those are being considered or not. The second thing is that there is an intersectional nature of the experiences that should be considered, and the concept of intersectionality has also been brought up earlier today, which nicely kind of aligns with this presentation also. There are some immigration movements within Latin America that we are not considering. And I was just having this conversation last night, but I'll talk to you more about it in just a second. And lastly, there are some sociopolitical and economic factors that we might not be considering in order to better understand disabled people's experiences, but also how to construct knowledge from within. So I actually captured this from the Unicom's website a couple of days ago. And one of the things that really got my attention, that a study that was done here in Unicamp, is that Brazil actually has 391 ethnic groups and 295 indigenous languages that are in Brazil only. So the question becomes is this an important piece of knowledge that we should be considering when we are teaching and we're educating disabled kids? Another question to ask is, how is disability framed within these groups? Because much of what we know about disability, it's only constructed from ideas that come from other places. How are indigenous groups considering and constructing disability? Is disability even a concept within the indigenous groups at all? Does it even exist? Are disabled people considered the same way we construct and consider disabled people? Again, way too many questions that I don't have answers for, but I'm hoping that having this reality within Brazil is helping you to think differently about what is it like to construct knowledge here, right now, at this moment in time. Another thing is the intersectional nature of the experiences. And I'm only providing this example because this came from a special issue that was recently published in Sport Education in Society. And again, from the 8 or 9 pieces published there are no knowledge constructed in other places other than Europe and North America. And again, those are valuable pieces to understand intersectionality. But how is intersectionality applicable to our context? In other words, have you asked yourself, what is it like to be a disabled boy or a disabled girl within the Brazilian schools? What is it like to be a disabled boy with an immigration status from within a Brazilian school? So when you start combining all these different identities and positionalities, it becomes super interesting to ask ourselves, what is it like to be in those spaces? So it's important to consider intersectionality to better understand the experiences of those that are within our schools, at least here in Brazil or here in Campinas. Another thing that I've been thinking a lot lately, it's about the immigration movements within Latin America, particularly South America. So this map right here, and probably most of us here know the political challenges that Venezuela are facing at the moment. And the mass immigration that has been happening over the last couple years from particularly Venezuelans, and they are kind of covering other regions of South America in particular. At least this one, it shows, as of 2025, more or less about 680,000 Venezuelans already live in Brazil. Now, think about this. Many times immigration is only considering about moving from one place to another. But what happens when you are not moving from one place to another because you want to move to another place because you want better opportunities? What about if you are forcibly pushed out of your country because you are not welcome in that space and you need to go and become another person in other contexts where you actually don't belong to, at least to start with? So again, if you look at it from an intersectional perspective, what is it like to be a Venezuelan that has been pushed out of your country, lived in Brazil, you are disabled, and you need to be educated within a Brazilian context? What is it like? Sociopolitical and economic factors. So although I'm not familiar with the economic models within Brazil, but at the same time, these economic models actually determine a lot of who you are as an individual and what individuals are being valued or not. Are you an independent person that can work and generate your own income and move forward with your life? Or you are somebody that depends on other people's income in order to be able to survive in society? So these things are important to think about, because what kind of individuals are we producing within the educational system in Brazil? Are we producing individuals that are only going to think about themselves individually, or are we thinking in community? I don't have those answers, but these are important questions to ask ourselves. Are disabled people empowered within the community, or are disabled people subjected to the good intentions of non-disabled people? In other words, how can power be redistributed within the school, rather than you being a non-disabled teacher teaching disabled kids to act in certain ways? Are we giving them the option to provide some options or inform your practice as a teacher? And lastly, are disabled people involved or considered in the design of their policies, teaching strategies, and other forms of ideas and concepts there? Are we considering their perspectives into how we generate knowledge, but also how we generate policies and strategies that are relevant to them at this point in time? So as researchers and practitioners, what should we resist? And again, I just want to provide you a couple of ideas about what to resist and how to resist certain ideas here. So remember, I spoke about the key concepts: colonialism, physical education, and disability. So when it comes to resistance, then the question becomes, within colonialism or within the knowledge in particular, what knowledge are you going to accept? What knowledge are you going to reject? And what knowledge are you considering to advance? Whatever you are considering to advance, how relevant is that to your communities, to the people that you care for? The second thing, when it comes to physical education, what kind of movement are you going to consider acceptable within the physical education arena? What is it actually acceptable and valuable? Is it all kind of movement? Is it non-normative movement being considered valuable within your space or not? I don't have the answer, but I hope this can make you think about what is it that you accept within that space. And lastly there, within the physical education, who is privileged or marginalized within the peace space? Again, I don't have the answer, but you should be questioning yourself in regards to when you teach, or those that are going to be future scholars also, what disabled people are being considered to construct knowledge or not. Are disabled people considered at all within that space or not? Again, I don't have the answers, but I do have the questions for you to think about. And lastly, disability. It's not a unique and fixed conceptualization of disability. I don't want to try and bring you what disability is like or what disability is. It's more so about thinking about what is the cultural influence, the Brazilian cultural influence, into what you understand as disability. And what is it like to be disabled in Brazil particularly. And also think about this, when we take and question knowledge, are disabled people sharing the same challenges here in Brazil as they share those challenges in the US? So when we just take this and question, we are assuming that they face similar challenges, the same challenges. But is it? Again, another question to think about. All right, some last thoughts here is consider the realities and experiences of disabled people within your local context. You have a number of indigenous groups within your communities. Are we considering them to inform what disability is here? Collaborations across researchers. I don't want to sound naive when I speak about this, and I think this activity today and tomorrow is actually speaking about what is it like to collaborate across researchers and having the opportunity to construct knowledge together, and how the experiences of others that have done this form of research can actually help inform and help create new knowledge also here in collaboration with you all as the people that live here in Brazil. And then promote epistemic justice through community-based and cultural movement practices. Again, it's very important to understand what's going on here. And don't just consider replicable what's going on out there. It's valuable, but again, the message is here. Can you think about your community now? And lastly, reimagine a peace space that it welcomes diversity. Again, aligned with what Sebastian was talking about earlier today. It's a space that welcomes diversity. Does it provide dignity to disabled kids? Are teachers providing dignity? Are you providing dignity to these communities in your own research? And lastly, what kind of knowledge are we embodying? Hopefully that moving forward, we can start thinking about what is it that we are going to consider acceptable or not, and what is it applicable to our communities. So thank you so much for your attention, and I hope this can help you think differently also with me. So thank you.
Temos tempo aí para algumas perguntas. Quem? Dúvidas? Perguntas? Martin! Oh my God!
I'm in trouble.
I hope not. Yes, thank you very much for your exciting presentation. I really appreciate what you presented here. You had a lot of questions, and I can totally agree to all your efforts for intersectionality. And you said you do not have the answers. I also can understand this, but can you tell us something about the way to the answers? Do you have empirical or methodological approaches and ideas how to gain more information and how to answer your very reasonable questions?
Let me provide you with some thoughts, not particularly answers, but so one of the things as an early scholar, one of the things that I've learned is being able to ask questions to others and being able to having a relational activity, constantly having this relational activity where we're constantly thinking about and talking with each other about these ideas and how to move the field forward, but not just moving the field forward with good intentions, but what is it like to move the field forward? And I think that's one thing that we are not doing as much, having these relationships across scholars. And I think this is a great opportunity right now to be able to engage with people, listen to their ideas, and how do they connect or not with our ideas. And perhaps we never thought about it. So if I could summarize everything as having more of a relational connections among researchers. And again, putting disabled people first at the front line, I think that would be a good opportunity and a good way to start.
Are you good? Alguém mais? Dúvidas? Sempre dou.
No fighting.
Pode ser inglês. Thank you for your presentation. And I have a question about, I don't know if the method or the strategies, because my study is about intersectionality, and I think it's something very useful to do in my research and in all the researches. And do you have any tips or ideas that I can use to make it like a to do more para ficar bem sincero com os participantes. Fidedigno.
That's a good and complex question. So just let me provide some thoughts. Again, I'm not very good at providing solutions, as you can see. I'm horrible at providing solutions. But I can provide some thoughts. I don't think we need to be thinking about how to make our studies or how to make our research more simple. I think that's probably the easy way out, and that's probably not the best approach. And by no means I'm saying that you are. But when we start thinking about intersectionality, it's because we understand human lives are complex. And by that, it's going to imply that we need to be in this relational stage and talking to other people about how to approach this better. Because if you're thinking about disabled people, disabled kids, within particular identities that you're considering there, you probably need to start thinking about what is it. The main question is, what is it like, right? If you want to answer that question, which you might not have the full answer, this is why you're doing this. But again, it needs to be thinking about the relational aspect, how we can actually approach this, talking to other people, other researchers, and don't be engaged just on your own perspectives here, but also thinking about this, how can, through you, people can come forward, how their experiences can come forward. Because ultimately, you're a tool to this, to bring experiences forward, because they are complex experiences. Some might be similar to others, But again, how can you actually bring this to the forefront in a more simple, quote unquote, simple way, rather than what's the best way to just do this research, right? I would say more, how can you make this complex activity and this complex phenomenon, make it more clear to people so they can understand that what people are experiencing in this context is not as simple as we think.
Thank you.
English, yeah. Fabián, it's good to hear. I think it's not a question. I think it's a compliment of your speak. You speak about 4 important things for inclusion in Brazil and Latin American, and one it's cultural diversity, you know, and immigration in Latin America. And I think we have you explained the situation on Venezuela, and I'm living in Roraima. It's border with Venezuela, and we live this situation on the practice, and probably we have in your sports project around 35, 36, 37 refugees and immigrants from Venezuela, and I see I can realize. These sports is one of the most powerful tool for inclusion of refuge in society, and I don't think only inclusion of society, but inclusion in school, in every part of Brazil. These guys are included because they sport. For example. In this time, we have 4 or 5 refugees from Venezuela, how part of the state delegation in the Paralympic Scholar Games, for example, until 70 years. So this be part of some team, some part of society. It's very important for inclusion of these guys, because the life in the shelter, in the refuge, is very hard. And when these guys is part of some project, represent some state, some part of project, it's very important for this inclusion. So I say it's not a question; it's a compliment for this cultural diversity and this immigration in Latin America. It's very happen now, and we can see in our state in Roraima, but I think in Brazil have a lot of immigrants from Venezuela and other parts in the world, and immigrants and the refugees with disabilities. So will happen. We will need to prepare for that, and can use your weapons for be our best for these guys. Only this. Thank you. I think Amazon.
Would you like to talk some? No, it's okay. Alguma pergunta mais? Ok. Lia, a gente tem a última pergunta.
Boa tarde a todas e todos. Boa tarde. Muito obrigada por todas as falas, na verdade, até agora foram muito legais, a sua também. Muito obrigada. Eu fiquei pensando um pouco antes da sua fala, eu já estava pensativa. Aqui no Brasil, e eu imagino que em outros lugares também, talvez menos, a gente tem muitas educações físicas, muitas formas de fazer educação física. E não é incomum que nos congressos e seminários e falas sobre educação física, principalmente escolar, o autor comece expondo a perspectiva, a educação física, o que ele chama de educação física, né? E a partir daí se constrói. E eu fiquei muito pensativa em duas coisas, né? A primeira é qual educação física que a gente fala aqui, né? Porque eu acho que isso pode ser um instrumento chave para a gente fazer justamente aquilo que o senhor apontou tão bem na sua fala, que é perceber daqui o que nos serve e fazer essa troca, né, não automática, mas mediada pelo diálogo e pela compreensão do contexto. E outra questão também que eu fiquei pensando é se vocês tiveram ou não ainda, né, a oportunidade de conhecer a educação física escolar brasileira, porque existe uma que é hegemônica, que está expressa nos documentos oficiais, que é da área das linguagens, né? Então tem uma relação com o corpo, mas pela linguagem, pela cultura corporal e de movimento, como conteúdos, e não o movimento em si, como o desempenho como conteúdo, e que é informada por autores brasileiros, como Paulo Freire, por exemplo, que é uma coisa muito específica do Brasil. Então, é um pouco essa pergunta, reflexão. Muito obrigada, viu? Obrigada pela sua fala.
You are thinking, that's good. So, yeah, that's a very complex questions and definitely complex thoughts, and I appreciate that from you. I am not very, highly familiar with Brazilian physical education per se when it comes to what the national curriculum is and how that is implemented and so. But one thing is when I think about physical education, I always think about allowing the people the opportunity to move and what movement is for them and what it is like to move within those spaces, whatever that movement might be. So my main message is always thinking about our kids having options within physical education. And typically in educational systems, generally speaking, we lack options. We're ordered to follow certain orders and organizations, and you need to be here between 5 years and 17, 18 years, and then move on with your life. But what are you doing between those 12 years? What are you allowed to do, or what you are not allowed to do? So for me, if I could summarize what physical education is for me, is providing people opportunities to move in their own terms, in their own particular ways, more than just giving them the rules on how to move, basically. So I know it's a simple answer, but I hope we can continue to provide more opportunities to kids.
Mais alguém? Alguma pergunta? Não? Tudo bem? Tati, eu queria fazer uma pergunta, mas eu queria que fosse em português, porque a gente está com vários alunos de graduação. Eu acho que hoje, aqui no conjunto, se a gente pegar o conjunto... Eu tenho que falar devagar, né? Let's try. Então, quando a gente pegou o conjunto do que foi falado aqui hoje, a gente teve uma discussão que, no começo, trouxe para a gente como que a inclusão precisa ser mudada, o nosso entendimento de inclusão precisa mudar, e parece que a gente tem um movimento a favor de repensar a questão da inclusão. Depois, a gente teve um momento de repensar o que é a educação física, os valores e o currículo e os conhecimentos que a gente tem na educação física. E agora a gente vem com os questionamentos do Fabián a respeito de processos de colonização, né? De como que isso é construído em questões de relação de poder, né? Como que a gente estabelece conhecimentos, currículos, procedimentos, estratégias e esquemas de avaliação numa forma de que vem de cima para baixo, numa relação de poder. E aí, Fabián, eu queria perguntar para você se você já ouviu falar, se você já leu a respeito do conceito de inclusão como uma estratégia de colonização. E aí a gente tem alguns autores que falam disso, principalmente fora da educação física. Então, o conceito de inclusão como uma estratégia de colonização de pessoas com deficiência, tentando inserir ele num sistema que não foi construído para eles.
Yeah, that's also another great question. And probably one thing that I didn't mention throughout the presentation is when we think about the disability models, they are constructed in certain places. The inclusion movement is also constructed elsewhere. And we have taken on that concept of inclusion that typically is more so linked to placement, people being together in the same space. And when, again, we have decided to take this unquestioned for many years now, at least since 2008, 2006 or so. And every country is making significant efforts, some more, some less, but people are making significant efforts to bring people together into the schools. And I do believe that inclusion, when it's just being taken as an unquestioned strategy to educate people, can be another form of colonialism in the sense that we are actually assigning the most power to non-disabled people to be able to make decisions in those spaces for disabled people. So when inclusion is, although typically considered as a positive mechanism, in reality what it's doing is it's a neo-colonialism, a new form to create colonialism in the sense that power is not being redistributed in a more equitable way, but it's being assigned to non-disabled people, again, to make decisions for disabled students in those spaces. So when we think about that, then, and how we can actually elevate the voices of disabled people, then I think it becomes important how we redistribute power and how we can provide the power back to disabled students to be able to make contributions to what we do with them and for them also, obviously. So yes, it could be another form of colonialism if we only take it as a placement strategy, inclusion in particular, obviously. So thank you.
Thank you, Fabián. Thank you. Pessoal, estamos encerrando hoje. A gente volta amanhã às 9 com a professora Janine Coates, professora Leslie, na parte da manhã. Eu espero todos vocês aqui amanhã e todo mundo no em breve. Tá bom? Me preparei para falar isso. Beijo. Beijo.